And now, just because I can't help myself, a word about parliamentary democracy. There is an online petition got up by Nigel Farage and promoted by Elon Musk calling for an immediate general election in Britain. The idea is to topple what Musk calls our tyrannical police state. Now, this petition has got 2 million signatures, which sounds a lot, and you're going to hear more about it. So, first, almost every democratically elected government becomes unpopular at some time. If we could use petitions to force elections, almost no British governments since the war would have survived for long. A tough problem comes along. The government does something unpopular and bang. Thatcher out before she really got going. Blair out. Boris Johnson out. 2 million sounds a lot, but it's not compared to the 6.8 million who voted Tory in the summer, still less than 9.7 million who voted Labour. Second, if we were a petition or plebiscite democracy, then we would almost certainly have reversed Brexit. Would Nigel Farage, would Elon Musk be happy with that? But third, and most important of all, we have a parliamentary system. That means that every 4 or 5 years, the elected government has to offer itself again to the voters. And if we don't like them, we kick them vigorously out. But in the meantime, we let them get on with it. And assuming a workable majority, we have something called a stable government. And stable is useful. It's more useful than chaos, anarchy, or insurrections. It's parliamentary democracy. It isn't tyranny, and by and large, it's served us pretty well thus far. If we started to kick out governments with petitions, I don't know who would dance more with glee, Elon Musk or Vladimir Putin. On which note, let's talk about the Ukraine war again, which is as hot as ever. The Russians targeted Ukraine with nearly 500 Iranian-designed drones last week. A British national has, it seems, been captured. But here we are waiting to see what Vladimir Putin's threats following the use of British Storm Shadow missiles actually mean for us. In London, the Cabinet Minister, Pat McFadden, has been giving stark warnings about our vulnerability to cyber attacks, telling a NATO conference that Moscow is planning a wave of them to cause havoc on our critical infrastructure, which sounds very scary. But is it true? And do we not have adequate defences? And by the way, if we don't, what should ordinary folk be doing to prepare? There is, I think, literally nobody better equipped to try to answer these questions than Kieran Martin, the founding director of Britain's National Cybersecurity Centre, a former advisor on security and intelligence at the Cabinet Office, and before that a man who worked at GCHQ. He told me what kind of critical infrastructure could be at risk from these cyber attacks.
I think what Pat McFadden is saying is drawn on two things. One is lessons of the war in Ukraine, where there's been a significant cyber dimension. So even before the full-scale invasion of February 2022, but after the annexation of Crimea, you saw Russia literally turning the lights out in parts of Ukraine. It took them quite a long time to do this. These would be 2-year operations, 3-year operations, and the impact would be relatively limited. Power would go out for a few million people for a few hours, and this is a country that struggled with electricity supply. But you could see the sort of harassment they were doing in cyberspace. Now they're at full-scale war. They're using cyber for intelligence. They're using it to gather information on critical infrastructure. But frankly, if they want to take out the power grid, they'll tend to bomb it or fire missiles at it rather than do cyber attacks. What does it mean for us? Well, it means two things. One is a lot of geopolitical analysts are talking about this as a pre-war era. Now, they may be right, they may be wrong. I don't know. I suspect nobody knows for sure. But we have to guard against that sort of escalation. But even outside of that, what Russia has done, both through itself and through criminals that it harbours, is it's done a lot of spying. So if you look at, for example, if we are heading towards some post-Trump presidency endgame in Ukraine, there'll be, significant interest in Russia in finding out what the UK government thinks. There'll be interest in manipulating politics via cyber, and we've got used to that over the years. The criminals will be doing things that may not be as spectacular, if I can use that word, as taking out power grids, but they did a major attack on South London's hospitals earlier this year, which is a really painful disruption when you've got thousands of operations cancelled. Russia has also, and Pat McFadden used the word reckless, it has in the past undertaken cyber attacks on Ukraine that have gone beyond its control and affected businesses here and businesses all over the world, doing billions of pounds worth of damage. So those are the types of things we have to be on alert for. But I think some of the ways in which the warnings ahead of the speech about Russia turning off the lights in the UK are overdone, and that's not actually what the speech says.
That's really interesting, that last point, because I'm thinking of people at home sitting there wondering, should I stock up on candles and torches and all the rest of it? Should I prepare for the lights to go out? What's going to happen? Is my bank going to go down? Am I going to be unable to use my supermarket because of cyber attacks? Are these things a practical possibility, or are they really in the realms of fiction?
Depends which bit of that you mean, Andrew. So I think at the more extreme end of survivalist hoarding because of, sustained power outages and so forth, we're not in that space. And I don't think we're in that space anytime soon. As someone who lives in an area affected by Storm Bert, it was much more natural causes for power outages and so forth this weekend that required stocking up. But I think that sort of, major hard physical infrastructure like power grids, like water. We can't ignore the threat, but it would be such a major escalation. It's technically quite hard to do, and there hasn't been any sign of it. I think we're not really in that space. The space we're in for everyday purposes at this moment in time, I think people should and businesses should undertake cybersecurity improvements, because it's more when your basic Windows operating systems and stuff like that doesn't work. And then your school perhaps can't pay invoices, and maybe it can't pay staff, and your hospital can't process appointments, and businesses can't pay invoices. And that's the sort of routine pain we've been in, mostly from criminals, but those criminals are based in and harboured by the Russian state, and sometimes by the state itself. So it's probably not threat to life or threat to the absolute foundational building blocks of life, but there's a lot of irritation, a lot of economic and social disruption that we can and do face every day in cyberspace, but we can do something about it.
Good evening to you. Sometimes you have to go and see for yourself. There are plenty of political blowhards and a few conspiracy nuts getting in on the farmers' protests. And so I think tonight it's really important to say that when I was there, this was the heart of the countryside in the heart of the city. Patient, tough, weather-beaten faces from Yorkshire, from Wales, from the West Country and East Anglia, with homemade protest placards, and their anger still mixed with a robust residual sense of humour. The protest involved a lot of standing around in freezing weather and not a lot of excitement. Well, this is exactly what we do all year round, one farmer told me. And asked about possible violence, he said, "Thing is, we're not French." Talking to the sea of Barber jackets and flat caps, the new Tory leader, Kemi Badenoch, told them the inheritance tax change was cruel and unfair. And Jeremy Clarkson off the telly begged the Treasury to think again. Now then, after 14 years of deterioration and cuts to public services that farming families also use, this Labour government had to raise taxes to repair and rebuild. The money had to come from someone. And the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, was boxed in by the promises made during the summer election. So I have a lot of sympathy with the government. There were no good choices. Meanwhile, the more this becomes party political, the less likelihood there is of a U-turn. It becomes about face and authority and political pride, and I know all of that. But we know as well that the Treasury doesn't always get its numbers and the impact of them right. And looking at what farmers say is the effect on some relatively modest family businesses making tiny profits, I am beginning to ask whether this budget is starting to unravel, and whether second thoughts might not be wiser thoughts. Stephen, let me turn to a few other things.
Of course.
You've always been a big Labour man, a pro-Labour man.
Yeah.
What do you think about the first 100 days? Haven't gone exactly as you'd expected.
Disastrous. I mean, it does seem extraordinary, doesn't it? Because you think you're in opposition, you've got a bit of time to get things together. You're not sure when an election will be called. It was slightly earlier than anybody imagined, as we know, in the famous rain-swept scenes in Downing Street. But the one thing you do is you say, look at what happened. Look at what happened with Boris and everyone else, the SPADs, the special advisors, the civil service, Dominic Cummings, all these people. Look at the infighting. Look at even the previous Labour governments. Look at the bad blood between Blair and Brown towards the end and so on. Let's make sure. The first thing we do, even before policy, if you like, is process. That's what Blair always used to say. And so let's make the process clear and transparent and honest and friendly and efficient. And instead they do the opposite. I mean, what is it? Is it just plain human susceptibility to whatever it is that power does to people? You've met powerful people all your life, longer than I have, but I've met enough to wonder at it, because so many of them in social situations, when they're not working, when you don't meet them, are really remarkably charming people and very intelligent and very insightful.
Keir Starmer strikes me as I've met him, a very decent, normal, unflashy man. So I don't get it.
No, I don't. It is a mystery that they could have allowed themselves to get into this mess. And then this, of course, only highlights the policy, hiccups. I mean, they'll start talking about the blob before long, because obviously Treasury and civil servants will say, well, I understand, Minister, you want to do this, but here are the problems. And they go, all I hear from you are problems, and part of me thinks, as everyone likes to do, what idiots they are. Part of me thinks, well, we lay off our own laziness, our own, sort of moral indolence and untidiness and desire to have two things at once on politicians, so we can blame them and think ourselves fine. We want to pay less for petrol, but we also want to talk about how important it is not to have petrol, and so we can blame politicians.
Yeah, we project our own hypocrisies onto them and then get angry with them for what's really us. I think that's right. Let me ask you, somebody who's not quite a politician, but becoming a politician, is Elon Musk. We've been talking about him a lot on this show.
I can imagine.
And you're one of the first people out of Twitter.
Yes, because of him, exactly.
So just tell people why you left.
Well, I don't want to claim extra sensitivity to personality and so on, but, what I do is it's what I've been trained to do from the earliest childhood in learning at school and then at university doing English literature, is to look closely at text and to try and interpret it. And I began to see signs of woeful and worrying qualities in this Musk man. And I saw him veering off into the kind of... I don't want to use words like narcissistic personality disorder, because I'm not a psychiatrist. But the kind of self-obsessed inability to take criticism that one sees in Trump, and one knows from certain people when they're drunk, but not normal people when they're sober or thoughtful. And certainly it's not a very British thing, And I just thought, this man is going off the rails severely, and it seems he's gone further and further towards the dark side.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned British in that context, because he seems to have something against us. I'm not quite sure what.
Well,
at the time of the riots, he was saying this is a country on the edge of civil war. A grotesque exaggeration. How did you feel at the time of the riots and reading that kind of stuff?
I was appalling and impertinent imposition. I mean, you can have all kinds of opinions. I know some people still like to believe there was a sort of this two-tier Keir business, that the police were gentler on people of one side of the political divide than on the other, but nonetheless, you have to wonder at someone who should be as busy as he is, not really knowing anything about the details and nuances of it, just proclaiming like that. And yes, I think he does have an Anglophobic side to him, whether it's his South African upbringing, whether it's his Canadian elements. Canadians mostly get on with this very well. I think it's probably the South African part. Maybe, I don't know. I like to believe that Tim Cook, who doesn't really have the same sort of power, even though he runs a company much bigger, he runs Apple, as you know, were he to come out on the side of Kamala Harris and so on, I would be just as disapproving. I've started to be very disapproving of me making any political comments, to be honest. I didn't at this last election. The last time I sort of flapped my opinions about was really during Brexit. And I thought, because I had 13 million Twitter followers, and I thought it's not fair for me to use this number of followers to have an amplified voice beyond any rights.
That is very, very decent of you. It's an unusual position to take and a thoroughly decent one.
I would say that is an extreme exaggeration of the situation. We have a problem with Ukraine in the first place. Since the West tried to make out of Ukraine a geopolitical instrument against Russia, and we have to deal with this threat, and we are dealing it during these 2 years, in fact. And my look at it is that we are improving. Our country is stable politically and economically, and defense industry works. We do not need a mobilization. Ukraine is hanging on the tiny rope right now of financement, since half of its budget is paid by foreign countries, by promises and all of that stuff. It is short of people on the front lines. It is short of everything on the front lines. And we are looking how it will continue. But speaking about existential threat for Europe, speaking about existential threat for values of Europe, it is nothing to do with the current situation over there.
You mentioned the geopolitical use of Ukraine. The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, was in Kiev recently, earlier in the month, and he said during that visit, when he supplied another £2 billion of aid for Ukraine, he said that he thought Ukraine's natural place was within NATO. How do you respond to him?
It's a pity, because I have looked and read attentively the document that has been signed with Ukraine by Rishi Sunak and President Zelensky. Actually, this is a memorandum of not an agreement in legally binding agreement. It's a memorandum of promises, I would say. It summarizes British policy towards Ukraine. And it says that Ukraine will not get negotiated settlement. It should fight, and Britain will continue to supply it with arms, on the one hand. And on the other hand, that Ukraine should belong to NATO. In our view, it's a controversial statement because it does not still take into account interests of security of Russia, and that was one of the major reasons that we have now a conflict over there, and we need to continue a special military operation.
This has gone on for 2 years now. Now, I know that you've said in the past that Russia's objectives include what you call the denazification of Ukraine, which means the end of the Ukrainian government, I think, and also presumably the territorial grab of Russia against Ukraine. What happens after that? Do you actually, as a country, intend to occupy Ukraine militarily for a long period after the war?
No, I do believe, since you named some of the goals that we are trying to achieve, I think that we have done a certain progress, especially in the demilitarization of Ukraine, since it does not have any defense industry right now, not anymore. But as for occupation, this is not an occupation. It is integration more of the new territories into Russia. It means that we are reconstructing infrastructure over there, we are rebuilding states, we are providing new highways and all of that stuff. So these countries are getting reintegrated, and I hardly believe that they would like to change. People of these terrains would like to change the color of their passports once again.
What about the rest of Ukraine? What about Kiev and the west of Ukraine? Do you want that to be integrated into Russia as well?
Hardly. Actually, we respect the sovereignty of Ukraine, and we do not to squeeze it out at all. We need a normal neighbor with good neighborly relations, which that respects not only all people that live on this territory, multinationality, all languages that live over there, and that has normal relations with Russia, friendly relations like it was for 300 before that.
This would be a country without any armed forces, wouldn't it?
Actually, we have had negotiations, in April 22 on that subject, and it was exactly said what kind of armed forces are supposed to be in Ukraine, how many tanks and all that stuff. As far as I remember, the draft was stipulating exactly what is non-threatening to Russia, what can be with what we regard in Ukraine. But then Ukraine suddenly withdrew from these negotiations, as far as we understand, under the pressure from the British Prime Minister at the time. And actually, we shall see what's going on. But the longer the fighting goes over there, the more terrain, of course, we will take.
And since you're discussing what's going on the front line at the moment, Russia seems to have changed military tactics recently and is using a huge quantity of North Korean and Iranian missiles and drones to try to overwhelm Ukrainian defenses. And we're told that after that, the big Russian bombers will move in. Is that a change of policy that's been discussed?
No. Yeah, well, I heard, of course, these rumors or things that has been taken out of the blue about North Korea and Iran and all of that stuff. No proofs has been delivered even at the Security Council. But I also understand that our defense industry complex is producing sufficient number of missiles, artillery shells, and all of that stuff that is needed over there. So
but you're acquiring missiles from North Korea, aren't you?
I don't think so. Why? It is.
Well, there's bits of missiles in Ukraine.
If proofs do exist, there was a couple of days ago Security Council session on that, but nothing proving that has been delivered over there.
All right, let me just be absolutely clear from the Russian side, because there have been discussions about potential peace talks. Anything involving the removal of Russian forces from territory that you now occupy, you are now in, is off the table. No deal that involves parts of Donbass for parts of Crimea or anything like that. That is all unacceptable.
I do believe it is out of question, because referendums in Crimea as well has been done. Referendums in Lugansk and Donetsk Oblast has been done, regions, and people was in favor of being included into Russia, like it was for 300 years before. As I have said, I hardly believe that they would like to be once again under Ukrainian governance over there.
Let me stay with the relations between Russia and the West at the moment. The Estonian Prime Minister this morning issued a very, very alarming sounding warning that if you win in Ukraine, you will be coming after the Baltic states next. And that is certainly the view of an awful lot of people in Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania. And what's your response?
We live together peacefully with these people, Estonia, Latvia, and Latvia, also for 100 years. Of course, they might have their own concerns, but as I have said, our problem is a Ukrainian government right now, for obvious reason, of course. But at the same time,
living I'm sorry to interrupt, but you were living peacefully with Ukraine as well.
Yes, we did, until the West has started to do it anti-Russian instrument, geopolitical instrument. But as I would like also to attract your attention that we would like a respect from these small Baltic countries, those Russian people that are living over there. Otherwise, it might be difficult for us to understand that. We know that Latvia, for instance, is trying to expel all Russians that are living on its territory. It's about more than 1,000 of people.
I can see a casus belli here, as the Romans would say, and we know that NATO troops are in the Baltic states. Is this not inevitably going to be the next confrontation?
I don't think so, that it is a confrontation, but what we need is respect, equal treatment of everybody, every nationality over there, and normal neighborly living together, normal neighborly relations, what we need with Baltic republics, not alienation from us.
Let me talk about what's going on in other parts of the world as well, because Russia has voted in the UN Security Council resolutions for a ceasefire in the Middle East, in Gaza. And yet I assume that the Russian position is quite favorable to the Israeli position. The Israelis, like the Russians, say they face an existential threat. The Israelis are taking on a group, Hamas, which they say are Nazis, just like you say they're Nazis. So do you have an instinctive sympathy for what Israel is doing?
Yes and no. We, of course, detest any terrorist activity, and it happened on the 7th of October. But on the other hand, we do not support at all what's going in Gaza right now by Israelis. First of all, I should say that our position is sort of balanced in a way that we do have around 14% of population, of Russian population in Israel, and we have a similar around 14% of Muslims in Russia. So we need to see balance in both of these baskets. But we do not support at all. We appeal that violence should stop in Gaza. Violence should stop in Gaza, not as a pause, but for forever. And negotiations should take place in order to arrange two-state solution over the years. That's most important.
But they're doing to Gaza what you're doing to Ukraine.
No, I wouldn't say so. We never strike population. We never move population. We never try to expel population from like it is in Gaza sector. So the goal of Israel is now to remove. I wouldn't say it's a genocide, but this is close. In fact, this is close, and I would say that there are reasons for South Africa to raise this issue with the International Court of Justice. I'm not sure what kind of ruling it will be because it will take some time, but really something like that. You cannot contain Palestinians like that forever. You need to give them a state solution. This is what is most important, and this is what Israel doesn't want to do. Neither the United States, I'm sure. Although in words they are supporting this idea, but in deeds they would like that Palestinian is a non-existent factor over there.
This conflict has been going on for 2 years now, and we don't know how long it's going to go on for, but we may be in the middle of it. We've spoken before, and the strong impression I got...
You speak about Ukraine now.
No, I'm speaking about Ukraine, I'm sorry. The strong impression I got was that the Russian view was that you would create a war economy, you would produce the munitions, the armaments that you need, you would change the economy to do that, and that you would be in it for the long term, whereas the West had a short attention span, would suffer Ukraine fatigue, and would eventually kind of give up. Is that what you think's happening?
I think that it's important for the British government in the first place and for the West as a whole to take a realistic view on the situation on the ground. Because if the current policy will be continued in a sense of sending troops, promising some money and providing some money, paying the budget and all that stuff, without any change in this policy, we will quickly arrive to a point when it will be a failed state in Ukraine. And a failed state, that's a realistic future. Realistic future, the state that has no economy, because industry doesn't work.
You've blown up quite a lot of its industry.
Military industry, yes. Others, no. Agriculture is 40% less. Half of population of Ukraine is now out of the country and do not want to return on it. So it has, and we have a lot of refugees across Europe which are living there, and they have no intention to return. You know that University of Ukraine will be cut by half next year since no students are available over there.
And to return to something, I talked about the Baltic states, but there is a strong view across the east of the EU, the east of Europe, that if you win in Ukraine, you will push further. This is only the beginning. This is part one of a wider plan to expand the borders of Russia dramatically.
I hardly imagine that since Baltic states belong to NATO, and Poland belongs to NATO, and I spent myself 10 years in NATO. I know what it is. It will be a big and serious confrontation, and as President Putin has stated many times, we have no intention to fight against other countries over there. We have a problem with Ukraine.
Well, let's talk about NATO, because the other thing that I imagine that the Kremlin is waiting for is the arrival of President Trump for a second time. President Trump has said that if he was in the White House, he would sort out the situation, the war in Ukraine, in a single day. He said he knows Zelensky, he knows Putin, he'd sort it out in a single day. Can you describe for me, Ambassador, what that day would include?
First of all, we do not comment on the subject of American presidency. We will work with the president that will be elected. As for president, the future possibility that President Trump, in spite of all things, in spite of things which are against him, will be in the White House, I can say only one thing, that he is unpredictable. This is what we have seen in the past.
Well, that is certainly true. Nonetheless, I mean, unpredictable or not, he has said again and again and again that he does not want to support NATO in the old way. He doesn't want to give American support inside NATO to NATO's European members. This is everything that Russia must be hoping for. This is a big moment for Russia.
I will say that the idea of American administration right now is to include Ukraine into Euro-Atlantic structures, European Union and NATO, in order just to disbarrass from Ukraine and to put this burden into Europe, onto European shoulders.
But nonetheless, a world in which America was not the fundamental backer of NATO in Europe would be a world much more comfortable for Russia.
Well, all this story has started more than 10 years ago, since the so-called Maidan happened in Ukraine. Maidan was supported by financially, politically, in all other ways by the United States. In the first place, they have said even they have paid $1 billion to turn over the Ukrainian presidency and to bring to power this nationalist, radical nationalist, totally, absolutely. What we would like to see that the United States will take care of its own interests now, about Mexico, about other things, and withdraw its policy from other parts of the world.
And that is something you would welcome.
We would welcome it very much if they will concentrate finally on their own policy and allow other states. It will be multinational.
On their own continent.
Multinational world. Finally, we have lots of powers right now: India, China, South Africa, Brazil, Russia. And all of them, all of us, would like to keep independent policy, not depending from the United States or what will be wishes over there and all of that stuff.
Coming finally back to the conflict, can you give me a guess, perhaps a personal guess, about how much longer this is going to go on?
Many are saying that the fight in Ukraine will continue until last Ukrainian will die. It is an exaggeration, of course, I do understand.
I'm going to fight the last Ukrainian.
Last Ukrainian, yes. So it's a great exaggeration because I don't believe hardly that many Ukrainians are eager to die for this government, in particular, nationalistic government and its policy. That's a change of it. So, but it is sliding down. I'm not sure when it will be over, this summer or probably next winter or something like that, but the longer...
It could finish this summer, you think?
I do not know when they stay, but we did have, last 2 weeks, we did have a certain operational pause on the front lines. Before that, as you know, we have taken an active line. Right now, these activities on the Russian side, they will continue very quickly.
So you're going to carry on pushing forward at the moment?
I think
in advance.
At least information is saying that it can happen.
Very final question. What are the prospects, what are the real chances for actual conflict at the moment between Britain and Russia?
I don't see any chance.
Zero?
Of conflict. Politically, yes. Politically, we're on a different side of the chessboard, let us say. But militarily, I don't believe that anything will happen. We are nuclear states. Russia has enormous capacity, and that Britain is as well a nuclear state. What kind of conflict may arise between us? There is a statement that commonly know that nuclear war should not be fought because it cannot be won.
Ambassador, thank you very much for talking to LBC.
Thank you very much.
Before we go any further with this conversation, I think it's right to get a perspective from China. Victor Gao's Vice President of the Center for China and Globalization. He's widely described as a spokesperson from the CCP. I wanted to hear his reaction to the allegations being made this afternoon by the government.
Thank you very much for having me. If anyone in Britain thinks that the Chinese government or the authorities at large would have any interest in hacking into the British politicians' accounts to gain information, I think that allegation is ludicrous. And if anyone in the Chinese government or authorities want to do that, it's completely out of their mind. Whether there is strong interest in domestic politics in Britain, yes, of course, me included. But whether anyone wants to hack into the British system to influence the election result, it's completely ridiculous. No one in China believes he or she can influence the elections in Britain. The British system is very, very different from the Chinese system. And eventually it will be very transparent and the outcome will be made known immediately after the election. So the best China can do is just to sit tight and watch over the election and observe the results rather than doing anything stupid to interfere in the election process.
Nonetheless, the British security services have spent 2 years or more looking at these allegations. Clearly, somebody was hacking into the MPs' accounts and indeed into the Electoral Commission. So if it wasn't China, then who could it have been? I mean, I guess it could have been Russia, or it could have been non-state actors.
I do not know. I think your intelligence system should come up with the evidence to convince the whole world who is doing what to what system. I would only say about the Chinese system, I would say China is fully engaged in so many things domestically, as well as in dealing with the headwind in the international arena. And no one has any additional bandwidth to care about the domestic elections in Britain. It's completely none of our business. And whoever who wins the election will need to deal with China as it is. So we are very much assured that regardless of the election result in Britain, China and Britain need to size up with each other and deal with each other as equal going forward.
At the beginning of the programme, I raised the question as to whether, given that China is the world's largest economy and that trade between China and Britain is now said to be worth about £100 billion, it would be possible for Britain to cut off from China, regard China as an enemy and turn her back. What would your view be?
China is the largest trading partner with more than 130 nations in the world. China's manufacturing output is larger than the combined amount of the United States, Germany, France, and many other countries combined together. Therefore, for China to deal with Britain as a major trading partner, it's not surprising. Whether China-British trade should be made more balanced, that, of course, will be a better result. But for Britain to be cut off from China as a trading partner, I think the loss will be both the British loss as well as the Chinese loss. And I would be strongly against anyone attempting to cut off British trade with China because it's suicidal. It's not making any sense. And the British people are well known as very pragmatic people, realistic people. And you want to cut off yourself from the largest market in China in the world? Come on, that's not realistic.
And what would be the effect if the British government did, as Mr. Duncan Smith is asking them to do today, and reclassified China as a threat or a systemic challenge to Britain? What effect would that have?
First of all, I hope the British government will really sit down and quietly think about what is the threat coming from China? What is the competition between China and Britain? I don't think China competes with Britain on any level of materiality. China is a much larger economy. China is the biggest economy in the world by purchasing power parity. And China ranks number one for so many things of important industrial output. And I think for China and Britain to compete, come on, it doesn't make any sense. But China and Britain should really promote their exchanges with each other and make a mutual benefit for the British people and the Chinese people. And I will be a big fan promoting China-British friendship and cooperation rather than damaging such excellent cooperation between our two great nations.
Right, Mr. Gao, thank you very much indeed for talking to LBC today. It's much appreciated. A big fan there in Beijing. But let's return back home with Nigel Inkster, the former Director of Operations and Intelligence for MI6, and now the Senior Advisor to the government for cybersecurity in China. Nigel, very good to see you there. You know lots of stuff the rest of us don't. Are we absolutely sure that this was the Chinese?
Well, I think that the UK intelligence agencies would have gone to very significant lengths to establish the attribution before the UK, the British government went public on this. So I think the overwhelming probability is that the Chinese were behind these attacks. And the fact is that we've seen plenty of other examples around the world. China cyber attacks have some sort of fairly clear footprints. They are now trying harder to conceal their activities than was the case in the past. But I think I think we can be confident that the allocation to China is correct.
I guess the big question underlying all of this is whether it is too late and too difficult to disengage from China at the level we would need to. The MP, Stuart McKenzie, Stuart MacDonald was talking about millions upon millions of Chinese cellular modules scattered throughout our infrastructure already, and people are aware that there are fears that Chinese-built electric cars, for instance, could be suddenly turned off. Is it too late?
Well, I think when it comes to a phenomenon like China, we have to be able to chew gum and walk simultaneously. The fact is that China's emergence as a major economic and political power has changed us already, and is going to change us more. That is inevitable. So I think it's about making pragmatic judgments about where our interests lie. And should the UK be looking to de-risk in certain areas relating to China? Yes, of course. Some of the immediate concerns about the misuse of Chinese technology are have to be taken seriously and dealt with. There's no question about that. But I think the fact is that China is too significant an economic power for us sensibly to be able to ignore it.
Turn our backs on, yes. Yeah.
There is no other country on earth that has the manufacturing and industrial capability that China has got linked to advanced transportation and logistics system. No other country can replicate China in the short term. In the UK, we have significantly de-industrialized to a point where it's probably not realistic to think about moving back to anything like self-sufficiency. I think there are only two countries in the world, the US and China, that potentially could go in that direction. For the rest of us, we are condemned to some degree of interdependence. So it's about how we manage it.
It's a solemn dose of realism there. Can I ask, you're providing MPs from now with sort of advice and help to protect themselves from cyber attacks and to be more aware of them. What kind of help are they going to get?
Well, I think that there's plenty of assistance they can get. I mean, good basic cyber hygiene still gets you a long way in terms of protection. Just doing the basics, putting in, whenever there is, a security addition, putting it in straight away. Changing your passwords, using two-factor or multi-factor authentication, all of these things. It's irritating. It requires a degree of discipline and focus. But if you can get to the point where people are doing this on a routine basis, that helps an awful lot.
Yeah. I think it's a message to many of us. Can I just turn to one final unrelated subject today, because we've just heard that President Putin has finally admitted that the awful attacks on the outskirts of Moscow were committed by Islamist terrorists and not by the West or Ukraine, as he had been implying before. How important a moment is that?
I think it's a very important moment. I mean, it's as with other major security episodes in recent times, in the immediate aftermath of that attack, Vladimir Putin was nowhere to be seen. When he finally came up, yes, you're right. He was obviously trying, to impute this to Ukraine. It's very significant because it is an implicit acknowledgement that Russia's much vaunted security forces got this horribly wrong. And they have no excuse, because the United States produced what sounds like pretty convincing intelligence that this kind of attack was imminent, and the Russians chose to ignore it. Not the first time, in my experience, that they have done something similar with intelligence provided to them that was meant to be helpful. So this raises some pretty big questions about the efficacy of the FSB and other agencies.
They're certainly not all seeing. Mr. Inkster, thank you very much indeed for talking to us. He has done it.
Over the next few weeks, I will fight for every vote. I will earn your trust, and I will prove to you that only a Conservative government led by me will not put our hard-earned economic stability at risk.
So it's on. A nation has been put out of its misery and the long dither is over. We are having an election on July the 4th. The symbolism wasn't great today. The poor Prime Minister made his announcement in a torrent of rain, his snappy suit almost dissolved by the unseasonal downpour. And his words as well, they were almost drowned out by somebody playing the new Labour anthem, Things Can Only Get Better. A man with the world against him. I was reminded not of pop music, but of that great English poet Stevie Smith and her bleak little number, Not Waving, but Drowning. Anyway, the election is on and Labour's delighted, not just because they're 20 points ahead in the polls and they have been begging for an election almost every day for months, but also because the last time there was a July general election in this country was 1945. Labour won by a landslide with a 145-seat majority. And so, for Keir Starmer, a good omen. He was speaking just before I came on air.
A vote for Labour is a vote for stability, economic and political. A politics that treads more lightly on all our lives. A vote to stop the chaos.
So why has Rishi Sunak done this? His thinking, I guess, is that with good news on inflation today, there won't be a better time to say that his plan is working than right now. The springboard will never be springier. Plus, the longer he waits, the more chaotic, expensive and implausible his Rwanda scheme may look. In which case, we're going now because, from the Prime Minister's perspective, things can only get worse. Many Tory MPs I've been speaking to today find his decision absolutely incomprehensible. This afternoon, the private Tory voting lobbies were seething with anger. I spoke to a former senior cabinet minister who was asked how many of his backbench colleagues he thought were behind the idea of a July election. He replied with a long pause. "Let me give you a round number," he said. 0. The end of this show, and fittingly, we are either right at the moment or one seat behind the moment when Labour finally gets its overall majority. It's just happened. Labour have a majority. The election is formally over, and Labour have won it. They've done it perfectly for our timing. Well done, everybody involved.
Well done, producer. Let's hope the 5 years of government runs that smoothly as well.
I suspect
for the sake of all of us.
There is trouble ahead. You know, human nature will out. There will be lots of troubles and wriggles ahead. But Keir Starmer is the new Prime Minister. This has been, as we expected, a sensational night in terms of the turnaround in fortunes for the Conservative Party and the Labour Party. But underlying all of that, a kind of mutinous murmur of hostility, I think, for the voters, for everybody, that politicians over the next 5 years would do very well to listen to.